Hi, I'm Robert Schramm, a behavior analyst, education specialist, author, and dad. And each week I share with you strategies to help you find the path to real progress for your kids who may be struggling. Today I get to talk with a parent of two, Kelsey General. So if you want more videos just like this, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on every new release. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Kelsey, and Kelsey is the mom to two amazing young boys, Brentley and Lincoln. Both have had the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, but both are, as anyone who knows anyone with autism can tell you, very, very different from each other. Kelsey has searched the internet and ultimately the world for the best help and advice she could get for her boys. She's worked directly with me, with Dr. Megan Miller, and with Dr. Mary Barbera. All of us are fairly well known in the autism services world as leaders in the verbal behavior approach to supporting behavior through ABA programming. Kelsey has not only learned from all of us in developing her own home program for her sons, but has also given her time to help work with Dr. Barbera and others. So she really is a great source of information and someone who knows a lot about what it's like to try to develop or find a good support team for a child who's not growing and learning the way that most children do. So with no further ado, I introduce you to someone I no longer work with directly, but now consider a friend. Welcome, Kelsey.
Hi, Robert.
First, thank you so much for participating with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. I hear you have snow up there in Canada already.
Yeah, it's our first big snow day, and yeah,
Yeah, well, that always adds a bit of fun and crazy to the day,
yes,
doesn't it?
yes.
So how are the boys doing?
The boys are doing well. Lincoln is now just turned 7 years old and is in grade 2 and in public school, um, doing
Second
pretty
grade
well.
already. That's amazing.
That's crazy, isn't it? I think Robert originally met Lincoln when Lincoln was 2 years old, maybe even a little before he was two.
Yeah, he
So
was a youngin'.
a little guy. And Brentley is now 8.5.
Wow.
He'll be 9 in March, and he is still homeschooled, but doing really well with that. And even though he has a lot of support and he's not conversational, but he speaks. He gets his wants and needs met, and he gets his point across. But he's not conversational yet.
Well, you say you're currently educating Brentley at home, but Lincoln is in a regular school district, correct?
He's in a public school setting, in a typical classroom with no EA support,
Wow,
or
that's
any.
awesome. And
Yeah,
he's doing well?
he's doing well. Yes.
Great.
Mhm.
Well, that
Yeah.
was going to be one of the first questions I asked was, how did you end up coming to those decisions about where to educate your kids now that they're school aged? You've
Yeah.
got one at home that you're doing the homeschooling, and you've got one in school. What was it that made you decide to go the direction that you did?
Yeah. So it was never. I mean, I guess when I had kids, I always kind of thought about homeschooling. I was always a really hands-on mom, even before the autism diagnosis. I stayed home. But then as a single mom, I had to go back to work, and those kind of thoughts faded really quickly. And the plan was always, while Brentley was in daycare and in preschool settings, to train everyone around him, really get him used to this classroom setting so that he could thrive in school. And that was always the plan until June, I believe, of 2019. It was, when you called me one day and things had gotten really, really bad at daycare, and said, I think it's time for him to come home. And what that meant was we had tried training a lot of people in these daycares. And at the end of the day, Brentley needed a really, really set way of teaching, in a really positive way, and a way that nobody could deliver with 100% fidelity except perhaps me, because nobody has the same kind of motivations as a parent has. And that day I left work. I stayed home with him and got him really, really in a good place over the next 3 months. And we were ready to put him in school starting in September.
Yeah, I remember that time because yeah, I was with you. I was with you at that point, and
Yeah.
And we had to really kind of decide how we were going to address what were some of the big issues that you recall at that time
Yeah.
that were most problematic for us?
At the time, Brentley was doing a lot of headbanging, which had always been his go-to behavior that had kind of roller coastered up and down. Um, he was not really communicating, just a lot of really unsafe behaviors um, that we felt we did have a really good plan to prevent. Um, but unfortunately, that was hard for other people to do.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a bit of a struggle to get people to put the time and focus into doing it correctly the way it needed to be done for him within the context of the other things that they had. And to be fair, I would say that the certification and training level of preschool and daycare people really isn't to the level
no.
you would probably want it to be.
Yeah, as you know, Robert, in Canada, we don't get a lot of funding. So Brentley, in a lot of countries in the United States, would qualify with his level of need, would have qualified for, high levels of hours, maybe even with more than one person at a time. I mean, his needs were so crazy at that time. But we basically were working with a government provided supported child development worker who we were lucky that they let us train to the level that we did. Um, so it was really no fault of anyone's beside it. It wasn't the right setting for Brentley with the right people, even though I felt like you and our other behavior analyst, Megan, had really created a solid plan. It just wasn't being executed right, and he was unsafe. So we brought him home, and the plan was to get him safe over the summer, to follow what the plans that were created, but me to do it, and then send him to school in September. But I think I had too much, I'll say trauma from what happened in June of how bad it got for him, that I wasn't ready to give up control or to trust anyone else to do what I knew was right. And he was learning so much at home. The
Yeah.
day before he was supposed to go to kindergarten, I said, "We're not going to kindergarten."
Yeah, and that's hard because you were successful.
Yes.
Um, I try not to use the word we because I was involved in some of it, but you had
Yeah.
other people involved as well. But you were successful in reducing a lot of the most problematic issues, and you had developed a really good teaching technique with him, and it was going well. And I don't think you were getting the assurances that you would have needed from the public schools
Yeah.
to feel that they were going to do any better or any different
Yeah.
than
Yeah,
what you had seen in the past.
my biggest fear again in Canada, in the province I'm in, they are very pro inclusive education, which Robert, I am too. I'm not going to say I'm not pro inclusive education, but what I am pro is every kid getting what they need. And for Brentley, if you look at a US system, it probably would have been some level of self-contained classroom with pull-ins to like music and art and stuff. That would have probably been a great solution for him. He would have learned reading and math at his level and been able. However, in where I am, it would have been him in the classroom all day, in a typical classroom with probably a one-to-one. And I knew from our daycare experiences and having you and the best people trying to train, and it didn't work. And so I knew that that setting was just probably not where he was going to thrive. And at home, like, he was just able to learn, and we were just able to focus what he learned a lot more on his needs than would
Yeah,
have been
well,
possible.
I've always said this. Brentley's, been extremely lucky to have you and the efforts that you put into not only learning what you needed to learn and finding the type of support that would be available, outside of your own community to help him, but
Yeah.
just the tenacity at which you go about making sure that he's getting the best help that he can get, and you've done a wonderful job with him. Let's just state that up front.
Thank you very much. I mean, it wasn't without the help of you and Megan and just all great people who have trained me, and that's always my main take home message to parents is whether you're going to keep your kids home or send them to 40 hours of ABA or send them to full-time school or do whatever you're going to do with them. My message is always make sure whoever's doing that is also training you, because I think we all learned in COVID and in, this time things can just shut down and, if you don't know what to do, it's a really dark place. And so I just think that's
Yeah.
my main message is
Yeah,
always
that's funny.
learn.
That's been one of my go-to messages for probably 15 years now. Ever since we almost 20 years now since we started in Germany, it was just seeing the benefit of training parents and making sure that mom and dad know as much as they could possibly know. Because pandemic or no, school, good therapist, good aides, people leave, and mom and dad are the ones who are going to generally be there, and they need to know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how it was decided that Brentley was going to homeschool. And we've continued, and I'm not sure Brentley will ever go to public school because, I mean, even though he can't communicate the way, a kid of his age might, he's at grade level in reading, he's at grade level in math. He is doing things where I firmly believe in a public school system, as no one's fault, he would have been sitting in the corner of a classroom not learning to the best of his ability.
Well, I guess what would that generally come up in people's minds at this point would be, well, what about social interactions and social relationships?
Yeah.
How do you feel about those opportunities for him, and is he missing out?
So my first thing with that is homeschooling, as I think that's a big myth. And I'll tell you that for a couple reasons. One, in most every community around the world, there's some type of homeschool group. There's people who believe in homeschooling and there's lots in our area. There's so much to do with my work schedule and his school schedule. I can't even keep up with it. But he'll go to different classes. They go on hikes. They have art groups, and parents all stay. And it's actually better for his socialization because they're often large families with different age kids. So there's older kids, there's younger kids. It's a mishmash.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're just with your peer group, when you have delayed social skills, it's actually harder. Also, because I still do have to work, he still goes to a daycare for almost 3 hours a day, with a one-to-one like he had before, and it's called an after school care. I drop him off there, I go to work, and he is there with other peers of different ages, and he has a one-to-one. He's involved in that
So
program.
he's able to get his social interaction opportunities a few hours a day where he's not also being expected to learn how to read at that same time.
Yes.
So he's actually able to focus on the social interaction as opposed to, well, we've got him in here with all these other peers, but we're going to make him sit in this desk and we're going to teach him to count and we're going to teach him
Yeah.
thing. And so that
Yeah.
he's not really
Yeah.
interacting with those peers anyway.
So basically, we
Interesting.
reduce, his response effort, and also, I mean, for a kid like him, and a lot of kids with higher needs who have autism, going to the grocery store, learning how to, just go to the public pool and go to public skating, like these are all places where whether there's peers or not, are just good socialization and community outings for him, and we make those a priority for sure.
So let me just take a second here. Let me take you back a little bit. Uh,
Okay.
do you remember back when you first started to realize that there were some developmental issues related to
Yeah.
how Bentley was growing and interacting?
Yeah.
And what was that like for you? Was it hard to accept when you got your first diagnosis, or how did you feel about it when you first heard the word autism?
So I can take you way back. So way, way back, I remember when Brentley was 6 months of age. I actually we did in Alaska where we were living at the time, they do well child checkups. And I remember at his 6 month well child checkup, I said, I think he's deaf. I said, when I walk into the room, he doesn't like look at me when you walk in the room. I said, I think he might be deaf. They did schedule a hearing evaluation. Everything was fine. And Brentley actually started talking at 10 months old, signing dog, saying duck. He had the sign for bird. He was quite communicative. And now I know they were all labels, but and kind of the concerns went away. He walked at 10 months old. He seemed almost ahead of a lot of his peers in those ways. And I forgot about the being deaf concern. And then around one, he was actually hospitalized for a week for not walking. And he like woke up totally paralyzed. And that has
Really?
happened again in his life. Um, and After that, he began to lose skills. Slowly, but around 18 months, he was almost had no words, was staring off into space type thing. And I actually had a best friend in Alaska who was a board certified behavior analyst. And at the time, I didn't know what she did really, besides work with kids with autism in a special education preschool, I think at the time. But I remember she had a big library down in her house. And I remember getting a copy of the Early Start Denver model and I think some Hannon materials. And I was reading those and I was pretty convinced at that point that he had autism.
So
Um,
you kind of feel like you knew it before you ever got a diagnosis.
oh, I knew it long before. I actually went, I did the MChat. We got him into early intervention speech therapist. The early intervention speech therapist, lovely lady, never brought up autism, but I said, I've done this MChat, which is a screener for toddlers.
Mhm.
And he scored like a 13, which is like the highest you can score. And I said, well, I did this. I mean, I think he has autism. And she didn't write it in the report. And so my partner at the time was like, no, he doesn't have autism. You're not doing anything. She didn't write that. So I called her and I said, I need you to put this in the report to get a referral. So
Wow.
she put it in the report. I go to the doctor and they said, we can't diagnose him until he's 2.5. I said, that's not true. I have a friend who's a behavior analyst. She has clients earlier. Send me to XYZ developmental pediatrician. They did. And we got his diagnosis when he was 25 months old. And at that point, I was relieved because I had worked
Hard
for almost
to
a year
get it.
to get
Yeah.
that diagnosis. And I thought my work was done. I've said this, a lot. I thought my fight was getting the diagnosis. I thought we have the diagnosis. Everything's great. He's going to get all this therapy. Everything's wonderful. Then we
And what
moved
did
back
you
to
quickly
Canada.
find out after that?
Well, if we would have stayed in Alaska, he probably would have got a lot more therapy than he got. It still would have been a fight for quality therapy, I'm sure. But we moved back to Canada. And quickly realized in Canada, you get almost no therapy. He was going to get about 22,000 a year, which only covers about 6 to 8 hours of direct therapy a week, whereas Brentley had a prescription for 40 hours of therapy plus weekly SLP and OT
Mm.
services. So he was going to get almost none of that. But I knew, again, I said, all I need is a BCBA and I'll be fine. That's all I need. Well, turns out there was none of those in my area, except one about an hour away.
Well, not anymore. Now there's quite a few, and I think
Yes.
we've grown in number to the point where it's a little harder to not find one. It's
Yeah.
about finding ones that are really good
Yes.
and really know what they're doing is more the task now,
Yeah.
and making sure. But okay, so there was one an hour away.
Yeah. And so I interviewed her a little, but not too much. And because I was like, oh, she's a BCBA, it must be just fine. Must be just great. And I sent him to this program in Kelowna 2 or 3 days a week. So I was driving an hour there, an hour back, 2 or 3 days a week. And he would go for 2.5 hours and I'd drop him off. And it wasn't good. Uh, it wasn't good programming.
And what? How did you identify that it wasn't good? What was
So
it that you were seeing that made you think that?
yeah. So originally I thought it was okay. And then I took Dr. Mary Barbera's online courses and I learned more about VB and I learned more about, and that's where I first heard your name. And I learned about the 7 steps of instructional control. And I just learned a more child-friendly approach, a relationship type of learning, and a verbal behavior type of learning instead of
A more motivational based
yeah.
approach to
Yeah,
gaining
yeah.
cooperation and relationship building.
So a lot of what I was seeing when I would drop him off is Brentley didn't want to go in the building. He would take off. Like we had instances of him running 3 streets over
Hmm.
at 2 years old. He didn't want to go in. When he was there, he wasn't happy. He was headbanging so much they at one point said I couldn't bring him back unless I agreed to put a helmet on him, which I was opposed to, not because if your child has a helmet, there's always reasons for that, but I didn't feel like anyone was getting to the root cause of why is he hitting his head.
Right. Why is he hitting his head instead of let's just protect him when he does?
Yeah, and a lot of their procedures when I got the behavior plan was very traditional. FBA, oh, when he does this, it's for attention, turn around, walk away, ignore. When he
Mhm,
does this, it's to get something. Don't give him anything until he does something else for 3 seconds. It was just really clinical.
mhm. So when you said that when you decided that it wasn't good and that you wanted to leave there or at least find out what else was available, one of the things you found was Dr. Mary Barbera's courses, and these are online courses, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
actually found them before I pulled him. Because I
okay.
Yeah, and I started learning and I started doing her techniques at home when he wasn't at the center, and I saw him actually making a lot of progress. So it was good to find Mary's courses, and I started doing that and realizing things at home were working better than they were there, and I did try and train them actually, in my I
So
did try and
you
train
were
them.
trying to train your BCBA
They
and
didn't
how it could work with
appreciate
your
it. They
son.
didn't like it. They didn't like it. So then I made the scary decision, and one of the final straws was I found out when he was avoiding work, they were holding him in a chair, uh, physically making him sit in the chair. A lot of uh, escape extinction.
Traditional escape extinction, yeah, which is one of the things we've been pushing back against for years. So
Yeah, yeah, and it just wasn't good. It wasn't where he needed to be, and so I made the kind of scary decision to bring him home again at that time and do it all myself. And that's where Brentley started to talk. He gained all of his early skills. I learned even more and more about the 7 steps to instructional control and met our other BCBA Megan who does part in your book. Um, and we were able to really develop a full home program for him in the early days.
yeah, it's actually it seems to me like there was a lot of really interesting or lucky coincidences that took place because two of the behavior analysts that I felt most similar to
Yeah,
and worked alongside with at like conventions and stuff
yeah,
were Mary Barbera and Megan Miller or
yeah,
Megan DeLeon. Um, and Steve Ward was another one.
yeah,
And when I moved to Penticton, uh, I found out that, you contacted me, I think it was, and we were, a block and a half away from where you lived.
yeah.
And you had already been working with Mary and with Megan. And it was, yeah,
Yes.
it was quite
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and I was already training. I would already the speech and language pathologist who ended up knowing who you were before you came to Penticton. I'd actually She originally was having trouble working with Brentley, and I kind of trained her on the 7 steps to instructional control in the early days, and it was just like kind of crazy how it all worked out for sure. I look back at those early days just being like it's crazy how everyone came into our lives at that time, and just so lucky for Brentley, and eventually Lincoln too, obviously.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel lucky that you guys came into my life as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you've
it's
been a big help over the years, and just I don't know, just being there and letting people know. Because like one of the things that you did that people who are watching this may or may not know is on your own, you created a video
yeah,
about the 7 steps. We're calling them the 7 steps to instructional motivation now.
yeah,
But at the time, it was the 7 steps to instructional control. And you created a video that you shared, that
yeah,
you posted, that shared kind of how you use the 7 steps with your kids, and it became quite popular.
yeah, yeah. That was fun to make. I like sharing what works for us with other people because I just think there's so many misconceptions and so many people trying to do what's right, and I just think sometimes seeing it happen in real life once you've read the books can be helpful.
Did you know that that video has been translated into Mandarin,
No,
Chinese,
I
and
didn't.
it is now very popular in China?
That's crazy. I did not know that.
No, it is true. I think I can put a clip up here. I'll edit a clip in of you with the Mandarin Chinese in it. And then I'll also I will link that video in the description here for folks who want to see it. I think it was an excellent job of a parent-led approach to really understanding and taking in the concepts of the 7 steps. And I really appreciate that you ended up doing that. I
Yeah.
know you did it on your own. We hadn't talked
Yeah.
about it or anything, but I was happy to see it, and I'm happy to share it too. So
Yeah, yeah, I think I made it, and I think a while after I made it, I, like, sent it to you. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I made this a while ago."
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun, and Lincoln was a pretty good participant in that project.
So was there anything specific that prompted you to make that video, or was it just
No,
wanting to show
I
what you
don't
were
really
doing?
remember, honestly. I think I was just making videos. I think I get a lot of questions on my Instagram. I don't have a huge Instagram, but I like to post videos of us getting outside and doing the community stuff we do that I think a lot of people think is off limits for special needs families, especially special needs families without two parents. And I get a lot of questions on how do you get them to do this? How do you get them to do that? How do you, you know, how is that even possible? Blah, 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 blah. And really, it comes down to at the core of it, it comes down to the 7 steps. That's where it all boils down to at the end of the day is building that teaching relationship. And then everything you do is a teaching time and teaching moments. And that's how we do everything.
Awesome. Well, again, I think it's a great video, and I will link it in here. And maybe if you'll let me, I'll share a couple of your little Instagram posts with your kids skiing and
Yeah.
doing all the crazy stuff you guys do.
We do a lot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Um,
remember when we used the 7 steps to teach Brentley actually how to kayak the couple summers ago, and it was really just like, um, motivating him, seeing what he wanted to do with the paddle, kind of, okay, well then first do this, then we'll do that with the paddle, and now he kayaks all over the place.
yeah, that's amazing. That's great. And and I love hearing those kind of stories. And again, I think that, some of the parents that I've met through working with children with the autism diagnosis have just blown me away by the only word I can think of is tenacious, just the no quit, the
Yeah,
nonstop. I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to make this happen for my kids. It's awesome.
yeah, yeah. It's been fun.
So let me ask another question. You've had home-based programs, you've had your kids in preschools, which we talked a lot about, and you're homeschooling now with one and the others going to school. Uh, do you have any advice related to those concerns for parents who are
Yeah,
trying to figure out how to best educate their child with special needs?
yeah. I would say obviously you have to look at your life and what's possible and what's not. Luckily in the training I've gotten now and such, it was possible for me to work flexibly. It's not easy. I have to work a couple different jobs. I piece things together of working in person at night online, but there was a way for me personally, and I understand when I say this, there's not always a way for families financially and depending what their career path is to make the decisions I've made. So I'll say that first. Um, but what I think you should look at is, and I didn't say this before, but I'll say it. I did homeschool Lincoln for 1 year, his kindergarten year. It was right after COVID. We weren't really sure about the schools. I was like, you know what? I'm home anyway with Brentley. I'm going to keep Lincoln home. Um, and I would still love to have Lincoln home, but it did not work. It
Mm.
didn't work.
It wasn't the
Link
best for him.
it wasn't the best for anyone. Let's just say that. Lincoln is a very project-based learner. He could learn for 2 months about snakes, and you could do math and reading and everything related to snakes, and things would be great. Brentley needs new things every day. He doesn't care about a concept or a theme or anything. He needs to work very systematically through things. And I was only one person, and it was a mess. Nobody was happy.
And
Yeah.
Lincoln's learning matched up a little bit better with what is traditionally in the
Yes.
schools as well.
Yes. Lincoln is fully conversational. He does struggle with emotional regulation and some social skills and anxiety. And he he wanted to go to school. He wanted to be around kids, even though we were socializing all the time. I think he just wanted a more school structure approach. And
A more typical experience. Yeah.
yeah, a more typical experience. And so, but he was very clear that he did not want any extra support. And we were very clear that he could not have it because when Lincoln has another adult close by to him, sometimes that opens the door for a negotiation and a fight, which he thoroughly enjoys.
Mhm.
Um, but when there's not a one-to-one adult and there's just one adult for the whole class, he does a lot better. So that decision was easy for me because Lincoln was showing me when he was home all the signs that it wasn't working.
Mm.
Um, but in general, what tips I would give to parents if you're thinking about should I homeschool, should I send them to school, is do an assessment, look at where, and it can be a quick, just like, okay, what are their strengths? What are their needs? They're really good at this. They're not so good at this. If you have a learner who is really struggles with transitions, like, and when I say really struggles, I mean aggressive, self-injurious behavior, extreme problem behaviors during a lot of transitions, a lot of waiting around, a lot of what is necessary to thrive in the classroom, it might be a good idea to either look at a home-based approach or a therapeutic therapy center approach rather than a typical school inclusive setting, because I will say even now professionally I spend a lot of time in schools and private schools mainly, and a lot of the day is transitions, is waiting, is kind of up in the air, who knows what's kind of going on until until so and so finishes XYZ. And it can be stressful for kids who have severe problem behaviors. And so um, that's one thing I looked at. Any placement you go to, I would look for people who are positive, who believe that your child is capable, who instead of being, I think as a parent with autism, other parents might understand this. I've always known when people are scared of Friendly, when people are fearful.
Yeah.
And
A
I've
lack of
also known
understanding, like,
lack of understanding
yeah.
and are unsure. And I would say it's best to go tour places, interview people, and see what kind of vibe you get. Your gut is not wrong. Um, and see, is this going to be a good learning setting for my child? Oh, my child can't talk and is having a lot of severe problem behaviors. Is learning to read going to be a first priority for him? And is the school prepared to focus on maybe things that are more of a priority for him?
Mm.
Or are they pretty stuck on we're teaching reading?
Brentley is such a great kid.
Yes.
I've really enjoyed him in my life.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that we don't get to see you guys anymore because of the move. But
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that things are going pretty well, and that
Yeah,
you
things
you
are
guys
going
are
pretty
continuing
well.
to make progress. That he's at grade level in some of these areas is really impressive.
Yeah.
I shudder to think where he or you might be at if you guys would have just kind of stayed with that first original
Yeah.
traditional approach and
Yeah.
and not gone out of your way to really seek out your own education.
I honestly think about that a lot, especially now that some funding sources are changing in BC and what that could mean for kids like Brentley. I think Brentley would be in an inpatient psychiatric unit. I have no doubts about that. Not because Brentley isn't one. Brentley is everyone who meets Brentley, he is the biggest joy. When
Mhm.
he is happy, he is hilarious. He will script all day long and tell you these crazy stories. Right now it's and they don't know where they are. And he goes, and where are they? Where are they? He is like a showman. He's a showman. And so much fun. And
And Lincoln too, right? Doesn't he
on
know
Lincoln,
the whole show of
he
Hamilton?
he does know the whole show of Hamilton. Since going to public school, he no longer thinks that's very cool, but he is
Ah,
still in musical theater.
right.
He won't talk about it though, but he is. And they're both very, very, very fun. Brentley does have his struggles. Obviously, sometimes he no longer headbangs. He hasn't in over a year, I think.
That's amazing. Because
And
his headbangs at some point were, I mean, we're talking hundreds a day,
hundreds a day on
and
concrete, on hard doors. Yeah.
not stopping his headbanging until he was able to really hurt himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty bad. And I mean, I have no doubts without my training and with just listening to people around me and around my community who just really didn't know how to work with Brentley, he would have been in a much different place, in a much scarier place. Because if what I've learned since knowing Brentley is if you try and fight against, and I say fight like because that's kind of what you have to do in escape extinction if you're really doing escape extinction.
Yeah.
If you continue to fight against a kid who is like that or who's headbanging and who's aggressing, they're doing it for a reason that really makes sense to them. And to fight against it like that is just going to make them angrier and in a worse place, and which will increase behaviors. And I have no doubts that Brentley would have been in such a place where it wouldn't have been safe for him at home.
Well, he made a good choice in you as a
Yeah.
parent, that's for sure.
Yeah. He's doing really
Um,
great now. Yeah.
the only thing left, I guess, that we haven't talked about that I had planned was just this final question. If you were going to give a parent of a child with special needs just one piece of advice, what comes to you as something that you wish you would have learned earlier in your journey? Maybe it's something we've already discussed, but is there anything that you would say, okay, if I had just one thing that I was going to tell a parent who was getting a diagnosis, here's what I wish I would have known right from the beginning. Um, can you think
Yeah.
of something off the top of your
Yeah.
head?
I can. The first thing I would know is you can do this. And I don't mean like you can do this, like you're strong enough to, just be a parent. You can do this as in an autism diagnosis doesn't change your child, and it doesn't change your ability to parent. You might need to learn different approaches, and you should learn those different approaches, but don't listen to any professional or person who tells you to do something that's against what you think is right as your parenting values. I just think so many people just go, well, they're the professional, so that's what we're doing at the expense of their kids. And I just think, as with the 7 steps to instructional motivation and all these techniques, there's so many things out there where you can build your relationship with your child and you can teach them, with support from professionals, of course. But um, at the end of the day, you can still parent them. You don't no longer know how to parent just because of a piece of paper that says autism on it.
So
Yeah.
trust yourself,
Yeah. Trust
and
yourself and
believe
learn.
in yourself.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if they're like you, they'll do the research too. They'll do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, you gotta
Um,
learn, you have to learn in order to know what to advocate for, right? And so those would be my main things. I just see so many parents who are like in this dark place because they don't know what to do, and I understand that. But so once you know what to do, you can just have so much more hope and so much more peace at this is a different parenting journey, but we'll just teach a little differently. And you can still do a lot of the same things with a lot more teaching and maybe breaking things down.
awesome. Well, I tell you, Kels, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you need to get back to the boys pretty soon. You
Yeah.
have always impressed me, and I just want to thank you for taking the time and being a part of the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this. I think it's great that more people are learning about the 7 steps, and anything I can do to get it out there. It's a good teaching method.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kels, and you take care and say hi to the boys for me.
Yeah. Thank you.